Tony in Bristol. Reference food banks, Tony, what are you thinking? Hi.
Well, it's got to be about 2008, hasn't it? I mean, I want to know what is the origin of this whole thing of the food bank. It's like a noose, sitting there waiting for almost everybody that's struggling, knowing that, God, do I have to go to a food bank in a few months' time? Many of people, of course, are already there. But I think the cause of it really needs to be understood, which is, I think anyway, is the 2008 crash with Gordon Brown. And, I mean, although, of course, people call it a crash, it wasn't a crash. You'd have sure known about it if the stock market really had crashed. It was a bailout, and that was public money going to the banks. So that meant...
Public money to private banks. Let's call it what it was.
Exactly. And so the bailouts really have meant that the government does no longer, since 2008, have anywhere near enough money to kind of support people who are out of work. Now, we've got massive loads of migrants coming in ever since who are prepared to work for much less, sending their money back home and then maybe staying for a few years, going back, maybe staying here. So the whole situation of whether people's work is viable or not, and particularly if they're on welfare benefits or whatever, has been totally undermined.
And so the whole landscape of how we do this thing called, assistance and has changed unrecognisably from then, you think? I mean, I think food banks, I think they started, Tony, I think I'm right in saying in like the 90s, but no one really heard of them. There were few and far between. I think the first one started in leafy Salisbury, but it was all under the Labour government that this started. It wasn't under the Tories.
I've never seen a graph of it, but I think if you just look at it, you would see 2010...
massive increases. But of course, as there's been more food banks, there's been the ability to assist people.
But how do we understand this? This is what I mean. And I read a book recently. I know reading books isn't necessarily that fashionable, but there's an economist called Michael Hudson, and he's interesting in that he teaches both in the US universities and the Chinese universities, right? Because of course, as we know, there's quite a lot of links between two big superpowers, not least of which is the Chinese using US satellites to help them with surveillance and things like that. But anyway, his book was out last year. It's called The Future of Civilization: Finance Capitalism, Industrial Capitalism, and a mixed economy. And of course, what we need is strong enough government to maintain. When he talks about finance capitalism, what that means is money rules. Money buys political parties. Money buys the press. And actually, what he's saying is that much of the conflicts going on in the world today, particularly with the Chinese and the Russians, are actually to do with these states are not going to let the money people completely dominate the economy, and not just the economy, but the politics of the country. Yeah. So Hudson's done a great job. And I mean, if you look at the crises coming down the line, not least of which is this economic one, which is leading to the food banks. What have we got? We've got Ukraine. Oh dear, that only seems to be getting worse. Yep. The climate crisis, that only seems to be getting worse. The economic crisis, it only seems to be... Now, no wonder people are getting a bit stressed out.
No wonder you might have to go to a food bank to help you out as well. Interesting. Listen, Tony, thank you for that. You're right. They have increased over time. The amount of food banks have increased. When you speak to the Trussell Trust, there are others, but that seems to be the big one. And I think I'm right in saying, I might have this wrong, but they were also the first one